Yes, good afternoon. I welcome you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at a regular briefing. We begin with the news that, of course, is now causing increased attention. This is the Russian-American meeting in Istanbul, in the development of a series of bilateral contacts at the highest levels. Today, an expert meeting is being held in Istanbul to find ways to solve many of the so-called irritants that unfortunately persist in the bilateral dialogue because of the soil that the previous American administrations created with their destructive actions. These problematic issues have accumulated as a result of the illegal activities of several previous teams in the White House, but they were all united in general, both by personnel and by this very destructive Russophobic thought. They purposefully created obstacles for the functioning of the Russian embassy in Washington, thereby damaging the very structure of diplomatic relations between our countries. As you know, Russia was forced to take mirror measures, and the realization that this cannot continue indefinitely. Now, it has finally become obvious to the new team in the White House. We have always said that the deterioration and destruction of bilateral relations is not our choice, but we have always responded naturally. We hope that today's meeting will be the first in a series of such expert consultations that will bring us and the American side closer to overcoming the differences that have arisen, strengthening confidence-building measures, and so on. I would like to emphasize once again, we will comment as information becomes available. But the experts have a huge amount of work, so we wish them good luck. Now, about the schedule of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, that in March, the presentation of the economic and investment tourism potential of the Vologda region will take place at the Optk in the Department for Diplomatic Affairs of the Russian Federation. There will be an exposition demonstrating achievements in the field of socio-economic development, which reveal both the natural beauty and the original culture of this region. This is an exposition. The materials of the exhibition will allow you to get acquainted in detail with the promising areas of development of international and foreign economic relations. Of this subject of the Russian Federation, representatives of the diplomatic corps, business circles, federal and regional authorities and mass media are also invited to the events. Speeches are scheduled by the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, and the governor of the Vologda region, Georgy Yuryevich Filomonov. We come to the situation around Ukraine. Nazi militants continue to terrorize the civilian population and the civilian infrastructure of the Russian regions. An analysis of archival documents published by the FSB of Russia in the 40s of the 20th century shows that the Koronizists in the Kursk region commit war crimes similar to the Vermont massacres during the Great Patriotic War, when the Nazi invaders shot and burned civilians alive. On the 19th of February, in the village of Kyzyl-Kuragino, Belgorod region, an official bus was attacked by enemy drones. A civilian was killed, a woman was injured. On the same day, 2 people were injured by drone strikes in the village of Oktyabrski, and 1 person was injured on February 24th in the village of Tishanka. In the settlements of the DPI, from the 18th to the 24th of February, 2 civilians were killed due to the shelling of the Apu drones in residential areas. At least 19 were injured, including 2 girls born in the 14th year, in the Zaporozhye region, as a result of drone strikes on civilian transport, on cars. On February 18th and February 19th, a civilian and an ambulance worker were injured. Eyewitnesses released Novogrodovka DNNR reported to the Russian military about the shooting of 4 children by horsemen who tried to escape and were killed. The attackers also opened fire on other civilians. But for these crimes, for these and others, punishment inevitably follows. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian Nazis and mercenaries for their war crimes. Ukrainian soldiers from the nationalist battalion Azov, Budakov, Tokar, Matushin were sentenced to long terms of imprisonment. They carried forward from the 17th to the 25th of March of the 22nd year, from the territory directly adjacent to Mariupol. From Mariupol, at least 40 shots were fired from a howitzer D of the 30th caliber 122 mm. At the village of Old Crimea, 24 years in prison was received by the Azov Melnikov, who in March 2022 year shot a civilian with a hand machine gun into the building of a pharmacy in Mariupol. Georgian mercenary Mikhail Gagnadze was sentenced to 14 years in prison. A criminal case has been sent to court against members of the Azov, commander of the mortar battery Ivan Nazichkin, mortarman Egor Yakovenko. The investigation established that in March of the 23rd year, the 22nd year in Mariupol, a criminal order was typed on the shelling of the village of Abkhazia, and his accomplice, along with his colleagues, actually implemented all this. Then two private houses, in the basement of which civilians were hiding, were damaged. The militants of the 22nd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Afu Bachenko, Malchenko, Litvinenko, Belchenko were found guilty of committing terrorist acts against civilians and the Russian military in the Kursk region, who were detained on August 13th of the 24th year. They received from 15 to 16 years in prison. Aleksiuk, Gorbachenko, Andreykenko, Lishenko, detained by our Ukrainist fighters, formed the 64th Separate Rifle Battalion of the 44th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Afu, who terrorized local residents in the village of Snagost in the Grinevsky district of the Kursk region. Occupied private households were sentenced to the same terms. Households have repeatedly opened fire to kill Russian servicemen and civilians. Up to 30 years of imprisonment threatens the pilot of the Afu Shimansky Morozev, who in April of the 23rd year violated the airspace of Russia on light aircraft At-22 to drop small bombs on an oil refinery in the Bryansk region. But they could not complete the task. Morozev was detained near the border with Ukraine, his plane caught on the power line of Shimanovsky. Shimansky was detained in the Tula region, where he actually landed. Both pilots confessed. Released by Russian serviceman Krasnogorovka. This is the DPIE, a booby-trapped cache with Orthodox icons, and also church utensils was found. They were abducted by Bandera from a local temple. In order to cover up the traces of the crime, they tried to destroy church utensils at the moment when our soldiers evacuated the found valuables. This fact once again speaks eloquently about the true moral character of the militants and the so-called commanders of the FSU. Russian law enforcement agencies will continue to work to bring to justice Carnazists, foreign mercenaries, for other war crimes, and about what is happening in the camp of those who support the Kiev regime. It's just some kind of fever that has gripped the ease. Washington's declared course to achieve a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis literally became a thunderbolt from a clear neo-Nazi sky for the European Union. Everything was going well, as they thought. They poured millions and millions into the Kiev regime. The Kiev regime, being an instrument of the collective West, as they believed, inflicted a strategic defeat on Russia. People were dying. Civilians were dying. The very land was suffering, which gives the very harvest that, strictly speaking, should preserve our planet and its food security, which they care so much about. And suddenly, the main leader in the form of Washington changes the strategy, says that it is necessary to negotiate peace. The members of the U urgently rushed to look for an answer to the main question for them. Will you think about how to keep the main question in life for them, or how to restore peaceful life? No, of course not. For them, the main question is what to do if the United States refuses further military assistance to the Kiev regime, and where can I get money for the continuation of hostilities? Exactly these issues, and not any other, were the subject of an emergency meeting in Paris on February 17th of the leaders of Germany, Britain, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Spain, and Poland. That is, the countries that are the main suppliers of weapons to the Kiev regime. They were joined by other representatives of the European Union and NATO, but words did not go further. Approximately the same picture was observed at a similar gathering, which was hastily convened by Macron. On February 19th, he invited the heads of Belgium, Greece, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Czech Republic, Finland, Sweden, Canada, and Norway. Both events demonstrated the existence of serious disagreements in the Western camp, which turned out to be literally not ready to adequately respond to the rapidly changing situation, and simply cannot develop a unified approach in conditions when the administration of President Trump has actually shifted the decision of Ukraine's security to Western Europe. The only thing that the UN NATO allies have agreed on is the need for further assistance to the Zelensky regime without regard to American partners. However, the sources of funding have not been identified. The attempts of the Scandinavian Baltic lobbyists to do this by confiscating frozen Russian assets encountered stiff resistance from Eurogrants, who were simply afraid to take such a step, and, in fact, explained it themselves by saying that after that no one would seriously consider them as the location of their own assets. And so, on February 24th, the so-called International Summit in support of Ukraine was held in Kiev, which was timed to coincide with the third anniversary of the start of a special military operation. Who took part in it? President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. They were accompanied by almost all European commissioners, leaders of the Russophobic Western community, and the Baltic countries, Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and so on. There were no Americans there. The former British Prime Minister Boris Jones lit up among the guests, but the one who, in fact, forced the Kiev regime to abandon negotiations in the 22nd year and doomed the citizens of Ukraine too. Yes, he found them to his death. Apparently, he stopped by to make sure that his idea of war to the last Ukrainian, she is alone and alive, and everyone else fell victim to it. The so-called hawks who had flown to Kiev in Kiev poured out statements about the allocation of the next packages of military aid. They, of course, pathetically promised not to abandon Ukraine to its fate. Well, it doesn't matter that they did exactly the same thing many years ago, pushing the citizens of Ukraine first to the Maidan, then to unconstitutional coup, then to civil confrontation, and then, in general, through a chain of provocations. They plunged into the abyss of conflict. Mrs. von der Leyen assured that in March the European Union will transfer the next tranche of €3.5 billion to the Nazi regime, the maximum contribution, predictably promised Britain, Canada $5 and $6 and $5 billion, respectively. Spain, Norway, Denmark, Sweden tried to keep up with them. For four of them, they allocated about €1.8 billion, and, of course, the high representatives of the EU for Foreign Affairs of the Security Policy, Kyzyl-Kuragino, tried to outdo his colleagues with anti-Russian rhetoric. Since the 24th of February, she has stated that a direct, quote, "The very reason, the strongest and cheapest guarantee of Ukraine's security will be its Ukraine membership in NATO. And the alliance itself, they say, as Kyzyl-Kuragino said, will only win a retreat into its ranks. A direct, quote, the strongest army in Europe." That's what she called the APU. At the same time, it is obvious that for clarity, she demonstrated the banner of the 36th Separate Brigade of the Marine Infantry of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which participated in the battles in Mariupol and in the attack on the Kursk region. Can you imagine? But that's not even cynicism at all. This is some kind of, not covered up such criminal immorality. And all this testifies to the fact that these very representatives of the war party continue to cling to the confrontational line. They care exclusively about the interests of their own, as Beryl used to call them, paradise or some kind of beautiful garden, and now, actually, about Ukraine's membership in NATO. Zelensky made another statement on this topic of Ukraine's hypothetical membership in the alliance. By the way, what is all this being done for? A huge number of these events, gatherings, the same number and composition of participants, the same stamped speeches and statements, absolutely absurd slogans. For what? Just to demonstrate that things are not as bad as they really are. Everyone understands reality. They pretend that something else can be fixed there. Not everything has been decided yet. It is still possible to stay afloat. But in their case, they will stay afloat, given their quality. Another thing is that the situation is absolutely dead-end for them. Zelensky, in his offensive at the aforementioned so-called international summit in Kyiv on February 24th, said, direct quote, "To be honest, NATO for Ukraine, for the citizens of Ukraine will remain closed. Then we, that is, Ukraine has no other choice but to build NATO in Ukraine, except how to provide such financing, such contingents, such defense production, which will mean a guaranteed peace." End quote. But the bank intends to carry out such construction, as we all understand now, at the expense of the Europeans. True, the Western European regimes themselves do not tell their citizens about this. But, as a matter of fact, I would like to remind you, because that's how it started. After all, exactly this served as a trigger for the internal Ukrainian confrontation, to become a security problem for the entire continent, the moment when they began to make a NATO bridgehead out of Ukraine. So what kind of world can we talk about in principle, if such ideas prevail? Ukraine's accession to NATO will mean a sharp and uncontrolled escalation of the conflict with grave consequences for global security. I would like to emphasize once again that a truly just and sustainable solution to the conflict is impossible without the complete and irreversible eradication of its root causes. One of the main ones was the West's violation of promises not to expand NATO, and the alliance's absorption of the entire geopolitical space up to the Russian borders, and of course, a fantastic performance was staged under the name of return. We will try to return legitimacy to Zelensky for this visit of Western European bureaucrats. We are talking about the Rada, about what happened there on the 24th, 25th of February. You know, I don't even want to comment on it, because, of course, it's just a real, I don't know, some kind of light representation. But after all, this whole show has another task, to distract the attention of the citizens of Ukraine from the fact that the draft age will continue to decrease in Ukraine. Because the situation of the Apu continues to worsen, but the citizens of Ukraine are not told about this. They are shown only Komvizorov, they are shown only Brussels officials who come, promise money, and a bright future for the citizens of Ukraine. They would like to take off these very wallpapers and see what life is showing out the window, and not the movie that the NATO members are spinning. To tell about the growing losses of personnel in the armed forces of Ukraine, but instead, a completely different tactic is being used. Under pressure from Westerners, the Kiev junta is working on expanding the mobilization base by recruiting young people in Ukraine, aged from 18 to 25 years. In mid-February, as you remember, a new form of conscription of young men who have reached the age of majority was announced, in the form of, as it was said in Ukraine, one-year contracts for volunteers. But we must understand that by citing the imposed conditions, young people in Ukraine, of course, will receive a one-way ticket. The so-called choice given to them comes down to 6 infantry brigades on the front line. 6 of these brigades. These are not some kind of courses on, I do not know, there are drone control training or drone control directly. These are not computer technologies that are used there, I do not know, or as part of their so-called cyber warfare. No. I repeat it again, it is very important. These are 6 advanced infantry brigades. Perhaps, for a layman, for a civilian, it is unclear what is being discussed. For people who have served conscription, or even understand what an infantry brigade is, obviously. For those guys who are now caught there in Ukraine, it will be a terrible meat grinder at the same time. They will simply be sent to slaughter. Against this background, the utilizers from the right sector, as a matter of fact, there were a lot of materials published in social networks, came even further. Here, for example, in Dnipropetrovsk, they put up an ad about recruiting 14-year-olds into their ranks, who should prepare for them. It says so in these leaflets, to kill enemies. The unwinding of the submission of Western curators of the flywheel of war is aimed at the complete exsanguination of Ukraine, depriving it of future generations. Well, as a matter of fact, for what? In order to squander it was more convenient, just need less thinking and able to fight back people. That's what the bet is on, indicative of the amount of bribes given by one of the deputies of the Verkhovna Rada, received by military commissars in Ukraine, then colonists. If the state pays us an average of $100 per recruit, then the price of paying off on the street is $500. The liberation of the military enlistment office building will cost an average of $3,000 in Ukraine and $7,000 in the training center. In connection with the planned termination of the deferrals from mobilization from February 28th, well, as you understand, these prices will simply soar. The same unfortunate ones who are not able to pay off in Ukraine and do not want to die for the Kiev junta, quite often, just death from the Apu barrages awaits. About the rich experience of utilization of mobilized fellow citizens in Ukraine in different sectors of the front. Recently, a militant of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was present again on Ukrainian television. That's it, all of these above, and further the following facts. They say that the goals and objectives of the special military operation have not been announced in vain. And all of them, as the Russian leadership has repeatedly stated, will be fulfilled. But Westerners, they suffer not only from Russophobia, they suffer simply from phobias, including with respect to all those who consider relations with our country the norm, even a priority. Look what happened with the president of the Republika Srpska. We have already commented, but we need to make additional clarifications. We share the just indignation of the general public in the Balkans in connection with the pronouncement on February 26 by the Court of Bosnia-Herzegovina of an absurd conviction in a fabricated case against the president of the Republika Srpska. This is Bosnia-Herzegovina, Milorad Dodik. This is another case when politics prevailed over law, as a result of which the newly elected people's representative was in fact found guilty of conscientiously fulfilling the duties assigned to him by the Constitution, and this was tendentiously interpreted as a violation, a direct quote, of national legislation, which the puppet-serving personalities of the Bosnian Themis tried to issue pseudo-laws of a self-styled, so-called High Representative, namely a citizen of Germany, Schmidt. The verdict in this case is clearly not just and cannot have legal consequences. It is obvious that it is aimed solely at removing the leader of the Serbian people of Bosnia and Herzegovina from the political scene, and his principled, patriotic line towards his own people contradicts the Euro-Atlantic installation simply imposed by the West. We support the efforts of the Republika Srpska authorities aimed at protecting the constitutional status of the Republic, in accordance with the General Framework Dayton Agreement on Peace in Bosnia-Herzegovina until the 95th year, but the middle principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity of the country, equality of the three state-forming peoples, and to intenteds with broad powers. The Russian Federation, as a permanent member of the Unsecurity Council and one of the guarantors of the peace agreement, uses all the political means at our disposal to prevent the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina from developing according to a negative scenario and neutralize the threats of intraethnic conflict, threats that may arise to intraethnic dialogue, peace and stability in this state and in the Balkans as a whole, and also to attract additional attention of the international community and jointly return the situation to, as volcanists say, the Dayton Channel. By the way, we also drew attention to the US demands made not so long ago to the Indian side to unload tankers with Russian oil before the 27th of February. First of all, it is important to emphasize that India has not officially joined the illegitimate restrictive measures that were initiated with the West against Russia's fuel and energy industry, including the so-called oil price ceiling. And given the particularly privileged strategic nature of our relations with India, our partnership, as well as the interest of the domestic oil and gas sector, we consider it simply inappropriate and counterproductive to comment on Washington's statement. But I would like to emphasize again what we have repeatedly talked about. Russia categorically does not accept unilateral pressure measures, including in the energy sector. Behind the sanctions policy of the West, there is only a neocolonial desire to provide an economic advantage, to do it in an uncompetitive way, to oust other players from the world energy markets. We are building cooperation in the energy sector in the interests of ensuring global energy security, maintaining sustainable economic growth, fulfilling social tasks, and fighting energy poverty. By the way, we take a responsible approach to fulfilling our obligations in accordance with international contracts and agreements. But on February 17th, the Third Caspian Economic Forum was held in Tehran. The Russian delegation was headed by Deputy Prime Minister of our country, Alexei Verchik. The event was attended by the Prime Minister of Azerbaijan, the First Vice President of Iran, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Kazakhstan, the Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers of Turkmenistan, and the Prime Minister of Tajikistan was invited as a guest. 6 roundtables were organized on the prospects for the development of trade, industrial and agricultural cooperation, prospects for economic, customs, banking cooperation, investment, cooperation with the Caspian states in the field of transport, transit and technology, engineering services, interaction of superecology, healthcare, tourism, and other issues. Representatives of the delegation of Russian ministries and departments also participated in the discussion, and during the discussion, a number of proposals were put forward to strengthen mutually beneficial cooperation between the Caspian 5 countries in various fields. As a result, a joint communiqué was adopted in which the heads of national delegations expressed interest in strengthening and interacting with the Caspian countries in order to increase trade turnover and mutual investments. They welcomed the proposals of the Iranian side to organize meetings of the Minister of Committee bodies in the field of trade, economic and transport cooperation in the Caspian Sea and Iran by the end of the 25th year, noted the high level of cooperation between the Caspian countries in the oil and gas, electric power, including green energy, indicated readiness to continue work in this direction, stressed the need for further cooperation in development of transportation, transport, logistics infrastructure, expansion of cooperation in the field of tourism. The participants of the meeting expressed gratitude to the Iranian side for the high level of organization of the event and the hospitality provided. The forum confirmed the commitment of the Caspian littoral states to the development of 5-sided cooperation and became an important contribution to strengthening regional cooperation in the Caspian Sea. We drew attention to a number of comments from the Telegram channel, which were just, as if directed honestly. I don't want to think so, but just in a minute of time. A couple of days ago, there was a resolution of the UN General Assembly, which was dedicated to the fight against the glorification of Nazism, Ionism, and so on. Let me remind you that this most important initiative condemning the glorification of Nazism in all its manifestations, as you know, is the product of 20 years of work at the United Nations. And for the first time, it was put forward in 2005 year. Then it contained literally a few paragraphs, had the support of less than 10 co-authors. Promoting their approaches on international platforms takes time, of course. There is no way to realize all the desired results in 1 second, you know. Over time, the document, as this most proactive but verified work, the document received a name that literally explains its essence directly. The essence of this initiative is the fight against the glorification of Nazism. The text has acquired a comprehensive character, which reflects our position on the manifestation of Nazism, neo-Nazism. In particular, serious concern is expressed about the ongoing war in some countries against monuments to fighters against Nazism and fascism, soldiers liberators, including their destruction or desecration in recent years. This trend has acquired the character of state policy and, in general, a real pandemic in Western countries. The qualification of the SS and all its components, including the Waffen-SS, as a criminal organization has been confirmed, in accordance with the verdict of the Nuremberg Tribunal. At the same time, deep indignation was expressed regarding marches to glorify the Nazis, their accomplices, torch-like processions of neo-Nazis, radical nationalists, in the same row, the opening of memorials, and the renaming of streets, schools, and other objects, in honor of those who fought on the side of the Nazis or collaborated with them. At the same time, concern is expressed about attempts to elevate to the rank of national heroes those who, during the Great Patriotic War, during the Second World War, if we speak in general, fought against the anti-Hitler coalition, collaborated with the Nazis, and committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. Let me also remind you, although we talk about this all the time, the same document condemns attempts by individual countries to ban symbols associated with the victory over Nazism, and it is emphasized that such actions desecrate the memory of countless victims of fascism, negatively affect the younger generation, and are absolutely incompatible with the obligations of the member states of the United Nations under the Charter. Moreover, the mentioned actions are qualified as falling under Article 4 of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which requires the state parties to this international treaty to combat such phenomena up to a criminal ban. Thus, the result of the persistent, long-term painstaking work of the Russian delegation, which continued this work all these years, was the approval at the level of all approaches that are fundamental for our country and our like-minded people, related to preserving historical truth, countering attempts to falsify the results of the Second World War, and finally, the number of co-authors. It's important. Currently, 40 states from all regions of the world are among the co-authors, and about 120 countries vote for it. It is important to emphasize that from the very beginning, the document was not country-specific, but thematic in nature. There was no mention of any states in it. The fact that some countries immediately recognized themselves in the text, well, literally looked into the mirror, and they continue to do it. They continue to recognize themselves. This only indicates that they have relevant problems at the national level. It is not surprising that this document is the subject of the fiercest resistance of our opponents. This is very important for those who write on this topic. For 20 years, the USA, Canada, Japan, Britain, Switzerland, Australia, Norway, Ukraine, and the member states of the European Union have consistently voted against and abstained on the text and tried, but literally, to force the countries of the Global South not to support this document. Moreover, for many of them, opposing this text has become the main task. It would be very funny if it were not so sad in the framework of human rights discussions at the United Nations. Now about the year 22. Their attack on the resolution at that moment took on a new form. Faced with a failure in the voting every year, the countries of the collective West decided to use another tactic of procedural provocation, to throw in the well-known anti-Russian paragraph about the inadmissibility of justifying, as it was said, territorial aggression against Ukraine with the task of combating neo-Nazism, and used all their transatlantic so-called solidarity to support it. Why did they have to do this? They wanted to force us ourselves, so that Russia would do it, to abandon the document. And they dreamed about it, and then they talked about it openly. In other words, if the Western scenario were implemented, Russia would then find itself in the same company with those who are trying with all their might to prevent the approval of the text of the General Assembly. It is noteworthy that this paragraph does not make the text of the resolution acceptable to our opponents. They understand that the essence of the resolution remains the same, so they continue to vote against the text in any case, even when their dirty, provocative amendment passes. They have a different task. Their task was to make sure that this text did not exist at all. And in this situation, Russia, together with like-minded people, decided not to fall for this obvious trap, not to succumb to provocation, and not to be led by provocateurs. We put this paragraph to the vote every year. When it passes, we use the procedural opportunity to officially distance ourselves from the unacceptable fragment of the resolution, which is reflected in the minutes of the meetings of the General Assembly, which is stored both in the archives of the United Nations and is available on all resources. What does this mean? Yes, it is difficult for ordinary people to perceive, but still we should focus on this today, since this topic was thrown into the information space like this. Neither Russia nor the other co-authors are bound by the text of this paragraph. And even more so, neither then nor now it was, and is not about his support. At the same time, we are systematically working against this provocation, and as a result, this paragraph, which is absolutely unacceptable for sane people, loses support. And we are rightly counting on its elimination in the near future. And look, this painstaking work gives its results. In the 22nd year, 63 countries voted for the anti-Russian paragraph, with 23 countries against. 65 abstained then, but the last time in December of the 24th year, the number of people voting for him remained the same, while the number of opponents almost doubled. 41 delegations opposed the amendment, while 50 abstained. We are convinced that Russia should not give up its position in the fight against the glorification of Nazism in the United Nations. Yes, as a matter of fact, where else to fight, if not in the organization that was born when Nazism was defeated, and only as a result of the victory, the defeat of Nazism. Yes, this victory does not always come immediately, and it is not always possible to achieve a momentary result. And how easy it would be, right? No matter how it seems to us, we have to fight. And sometimes you need to combine the desire to solve everything instantly and painstaking work. We are engaged in a diplomatic struggle for the interests of our country, but in this case, we are also uniting the international community on this important topic. We are working on this resolution not a week before putting it to the vote. We are fighting against this amendment to this resolution, not an hour before the vote. We work every day. Did those who were engaged in this information provocation know about it, including, first of all, in the Russian information space? Yes, they didn't even think about it. Do you want to help? By the way, let's combine our capabilities, potentials, and resources. It's a pleasure to interact with you. I am now talking about those media resources that took up this topic just like that, once. Well, they just published the materials in 15 or 20 minutes and moved on. If you want us to work together, we are only for it. contact us. Or even better, we will turn. Then do not refuse. I would like to note that all statements made by representatives of the delegation of the Russian Federation and other states, when adopting the resolution on the Western Amendment, are publicly available. Russian diplomats have repeatedly given detailed comments on exactly what I have just said to various media outlets. We explained both procedural aspects and substantive aspects related to the approval of our key initiative in the UN. In this regard, we are grateful to Russian journalists, bloggers, and experts who cover this topic in a truly highly professional manner. For our part, we intend to continue to make every effort to counteract the historical aggression unleashed by individual countries against our country. Another important material, we will have some brief announcements today, and we will give detailed materials after the briefing, and in the text of the briefing too. From the 1st to the 3rd of March, the second stage of the SCO International Chess Tournament will be held in 18 countries, and more than 30 regions of Russia. As you may recall, we talked about its first stage at a briefing on December 18th of the 24th year. Then more than 3,000 people from more than 10 SCO countries took part in it. The tournament is organized in a hybrid format. It will be possible to participate online and offline. From the 1st to the 3rd of March, offline tournaments will be held in many cities of Russia. Even more participating regions joined the second stage. And at the same time, the online stage of the tournament will be held, which will be organized by the Matches platform. In addition to Russian chess players, 15 countries will take part in it. The third stage is already scheduled for May. The final of the tournament will be held in July of the 25th year, as part of the first international sports games of school children of the SCO countries. We will give all the links in the text of today's briefing, and invite all chess players, as well as representatives of the media, to take part in this landmark event. The 5th of March marks the 55th anniversary of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. We will definitely publish detailed material on this subject on the website. By the way, there is also important information about our traditional values and culture and humanitarian cooperation. From the 26th of February to the 2nd of March, an exhibition and fair of folk arts and crafts of our entire vast homeland of Russia, Rook Spring Fantasy, is being held right now at the Expo Exhibition Center. Therefore, by the way, we are often asked what kind of values you have, where you can read about them and see. Come to the Rook now and see what exactly we are fighting for, what we are putting aside, what is a truly life-forming meaning for us. And the National Center of Russia will hold an open dialogue on the future of the world from the 28th to the 30th of April, a new platform for global growth. The main goal of the project is to develop a number of initiatives and recommendations aimed at ensuring stable economic growth. In the face of modern challenges and changes, during the discussion, experts focus on four main topics: investment in people, investment in technology, in the environment, and connectivity. Everyone is invited to participate in the formation of a proposal for discussion in the format of an open dialogue. It is necessary to submit your ideas on the topic of ensuring the growth of the world economy in the format of an essay by the 9th of March this year. Absolutely, it can be, and be sure that we will definitely place all the links in the text of the briefing. The authors of the best essays will be invited to the National Center of Russia, and from the 28th to the 30th of April, their exact participation, in fact, in an open dialogue on the future of the world will take place there. A new platform for global growth in the period from February 26th to March 1st, a Lao delegation headed by the mayor of the capital city of Vientiane will be in Moscow, and in this regard, the Days of Invention will be held in Moscow on February 27th. They are organized with the support of the Department of Foreign Economic and International Relations of our capital. The event is a unique opportunity to get acquainted with the culture of Laos, learn more about its history. The planned signing of the cooperation program between the government of Moscow and the mayor's office of Vientiane for the period from the 25th to the 28th years, and the Moscow Chamber of Commerce and Industry timed a business forum on the development of business cooperation between the two capitals, and an exhibition presentation of Lao products To coincide with the days of Vientiane, the participants will discuss cooperation in tourism, culture, technology, energy, agriculture, and trade. And the Vientiane days will be an important step in deepening relations between Russia and Laos, creating a platform for further cultural exchange and strengthening ties in the business sphere. They will continue the tradition of international events, such as the Days of Moscow in Vientiane. Let me remind you that they took place last 24th year and will become an important milestone in the cultural life of the city and a significant contribution to the development of international relations. And the 1st of March marks 35 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the USSR and the Vatican. This is the turning point when the world was on the verge of fateful changes. Two very different countries, states have taken a step towards each other, wanting to put misunderstandings in the past, establish dialogue and cooperation. Over the past years, the Vatican has accumulated a rich experience of cooperation in the fields of science, culture, education, historical and archival affairs, and healthcare. And today, the dialogue between the Russian Federation and the Holy Prelate is constructive, based on the principles of mutual respect, adherence to traditional values, as well as the preservation of civilizational identity. We support the efforts of the Vatican and Pope Francis personally to find peaceful ways to resolve conflicts. And in this context, we appreciate the deeply balanced approach of the Holy See on the Ukrainian crisis, the desire to contribute to solving a number of humanitarian problems in the context of the conflict around Ukraine. Of course, we are concerned about the latest reports from the press service of the Holy See about the deterioration of the pontiff's health. We wish you a speedy recovery and are open to further development of cooperation with the Vatican on topical issues of the international agenda based on common interests and the desire for a more just world order. And we will definitely publish a separate material. It will be dedicated to the centenary of the birth of Soviet diplomat Vasily Stepanovich Safranchik. Well, let's move on to the questions. Please, is international life with us?
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Bloomberg recently reported that during her visit to India, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, as far as I understand, the visit begins today. So she will ask for help from the Prime Minister of India in a render fashion to ensure compliance with sanctions against Russia. How could you comment on this information?
Well, of course. It's literally just a disgrace for the European Commission and for all this aggressive West to now drag around in various countries that do not belong to their community and beg for this. I don't even know how to say it. Some semblance of commitment to the anti-Russian frenzy. We know perfectly well and see perfectly well that the world majority and, of course, India, soberly assesses the implementation of this aggressive line of Brussels. The BRICS and SCO member states condemn unilateral coercive measures and interference in the sovereign affairs of other states. And despite the attempts of pressure exerted by Brussels, we are confident that our partners, following the sovereign course of development, will continue to maintain mutually beneficial economic relations with our country. But it's a shame for the so-called, as they call themselves in quotation marks, the enlightened West, to travel to countries that they treat down, calling them like they're a wild jungle, and asking them to support a beautiful garden in this madness. Shame.
Thank you very much. One more question. On February 19th, Moldovan Foreign Minister Mihai Popșoi said that the country's authorities decided to terminate the 98th Russian-Moldovan Agreement on cultural centers, since the Russian house in Chisinau, functioning on its basis, allegedly works to undermine the statehood and sovereignty of the Republic of Moldova. How would you comment on this?
As you know, to date, there have been no official notifications from the Moldovan side about the decision to terminate the intergovernmental agreement of the 98th year on the establishment of the functioning of cultural centers. Of course, we need to understand that all the statements that the Russian house in Chisinau allegedly undermines the Moldovan statehood are completely absurd, misinformation. These are fakes. The Russian house in Chisinau is engaged in the implementation of projects exclusively exclusively humanitarian, educational orientation. It is the center of attraction for a huge number of Moldovans. 80% of them, as you know, speak Russian. Speak it, use it. The Russian House is a platform for events aimed at strengthening contacts and ties between peoples. What's problematic about it? What is so incomprehensible about this? These events are public. They are open. Announcements are made about them. People come there. Then, there is a photo and video recording of these events. What are they coming up with? The cynicism of the accusations of Moldovan officials that are made against the Russian House is that during the years of being in power, the Moldovan leadership itself has done everything to erode the sovereignty of its country and the national identity of Moldovans, as much as no one from the outside would have done it allegedly wanting. Do I need to give examples? Come on, look here. According to local experts, there are over 10,000 NGOs in Moldova, fully or partially funded by the West, and working to consolidate the republic in the orbit of the influence of the collective West. Many representatives of the Moldovan leadership simply come from these NGOs, and they themselves are citizens of another country. Here's a blow to identity. Identity independence. According to media reports, over the past 3 years, the volume of their support from, for example, Washington alone, amounted to almost $950 million. What are they telling us about sovereignty? The Russian House does not allow developing sovereignty by holding exhibitions and concerts. Among the main grant givers, known for their activities related specifically to interference in the internal affairs of a foreign state, this is the agency ISAT, on which even the Americans have now branded non-compliance, obscenity, corruption. And, of course, the Soros Foundation is there too. The territory of Moldova is increasingly being used for military exercises, with the participation of military personnel and NATO member countries. This is a blow to national identity and independence. The process of forced Romanization of Moldova also continues. There is a consistent transfer of public positions to people from Bucharest. In February, they were granted the position of deputy, the head of the National Bank, the post of head of the National Institute of Justice, and all the Russian House interferes. According to polls, over 60% of Moldovans are categorically against the practice of Romanization. The debt, well, in general, slavery of Moldova has reached unprecedented proportions. Under the current authorities, the authorities announced with pomp the allocation of €1.9 billion by Brussels as part of the so-called Moldovan Growth Plan. At the same time, the most important fact is kept silent. The lion's share of this amount, namely €1.5 billion, are regular loans. They will have to repay these loans. Only to give, as you understand, with a vengeance. What kind of debt does Moldova have today, under the current authorities? $7 billion. That's where sovereignty is being undermined, not by the Russian House with its educational, absolutely positive humanitarian mission. Therefore, we hope that the Moldovan leadership will show common sense and refrain from taking steps to terminate the Russian-Moldovan agreement on cultural centers and close the Russian House, which contradict the interests of a significant part of Moldovan citizens.
Thank you very much.
Liria Novosti is with us.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We are with you?
Hello.
We have 2 questions. The first question, and you have already touched on this in part, how would you comment on the past meetings in the Face Plus format, which took place on February 12th, and also the Paris meeting on February 17th on the same issue, support for Ukraine?
But we see that most of the statements from Brussels, from the capital of Europe, are, in fact, about the same thing, about the escalation of the conflict and about the prevention of any peace initiatives. This is, as it were, the dominant superstructure, which, strictly speaking, crowns any event. The inadmissibility of a peaceful settlement of the situation in Ukraine is simply a priority, you know, a goal and a task for Brussels. They simply openly indicate that they will sabotage any deal any initiative, any negotiation process in any way. Now they have come up with a story about the fact that they will undermine the negotiation process by not participating. Well, it's not even to spite grandma. I'll freeze my hands or feet or ears. I don't even know. And this is about stopping the train, so to speak, by standing on the railway track. About the same thing. In the world community, the peacekeeping, so-called peacekeeping efforts of the European Union and its member countries, in the context of the Ukrainian crisis, are fresh in the memory of what they did before. Now you remember France, Germany, Poland gave guarantees. They were called guarantees within the framework of the agreements of the president of Ukraine Yanukovych with the opposition. In February 2000 of the 14th year, how long did their guarantees last? Less than a day, a couple of hours. For example, the 15th year of the UN Security Council, a set of measures to implement the Minsk agreements was approved. What did Merkel say then? What did Hollande say then? That they were not going to implement all this and used it to prepare the Kyiv regime for war. Instead of promoting a peaceful settlement, Brussels has repeatedly called for avoiding any negotiations with Russia, not solving the situation of peace, betting on the situation on the battlefield, that is, on a military solution. They put forward the ultimatum formula of the so-called peace, then the formula of victory Zelensky's troubles. Then everything happened. This is what they call guarantees, and their contribution, and their participation in the settlement of the situation. We remember that it is simply impossible to remain the main apologist of the war in Ukraine, while not being shy about demanding a separate role in certain peace negotiations. Here it is necessary to be determined by them only after the rejection of this monstrous rhetoric by the European Union, from the militaristic line, from some kind of endless rudeness, from the morbidity in the form of Russophobia, it will be possible to talk about some kind of constructive contribution of Brussels to the Ukrainian settlement.
If I let you ask the second question, they are now actively discussing Abkhazia in the context of the upcoming second round of presidential elections on March 1st. How could you comment on this topic in general?
We are closely following the development of the situation in Abkhazia, of course, because it has long-standing friendly relations with Russia. Our country provides one state, the majority of whose residents have Russian citizenship, with comprehensive assistance, on a mutually beneficial basis. Just a few facts. Only recently, a large-scale reconstruction of Sukhumi Airport has been carried out. A telemedicine center has been opened in the local Republican hospital. A program of general medical examination of Abkhazian school children has been launched, and a lot has been done in addition to this. And these measures will contribute to the sustainable development of Abkhazia, create more favorable conditions for Russian tourists to visit the country, and as for the electoral cycle itself, the Russian side will send observers there at the invitation of Sukhoi. They, together with their foreign colleagues, will monitor the voting processes. Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, since the November riots, the political situation has not fully stabilized in Abkhazia. We proceed from the fact that on the 1st of March, every citizen of this country will have the opportunity to freely vote for their candidate. The process of expression of will be organized strictly in accordance with national legislation and generally recognized democratic norms, with due provision of law and order. As a result, the results will be recognized by all political forces. In other words, strictly speaking, this is the very democratic process based on the legality of law. Moscow hopes that the completion of the electoral cycle will lead to the strengthening of the Republic's security and stability, growth and prosperity based on allied relations with Russia.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Thank you. Is Ukraine with us? Ru.
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Anna Cherkasova. I represent the editorial office of Ukraine. Ru, why do you think Britain is taking such an actively aggressive position towards Russia? That's what the Biden administration actually took earlier. We don't have territorial economic disputes with Britain. What, then, is the British dislike of Russia?
And who told you that we don't have territorial economic disputes with Britain? What do you mean by territorial disputes? You probably look at it, as they say, the old-fashioned way, the border, neighbors. And why don't you think that they treat it differently there? Why don't you think that they, in principle, consider the territory of our country, I mean London, and all these Russophobic British elites simply as their patrimony? Why don't you think that they consider the resources lying on our territory as those that they need, and we should not have the right to them from their point of view again? For some reason, you do not consider, and do not consider the concept of any territorial claims in this context. Maybe from the point of view of jurisprudence, you really will not find such a reading of the law, but from the point of view of historical truth, this is exactly how they relate to it. As they say, what is ours should not be ours, but that's how they view them. This is, you know, a colonial approach. It's just that never in history have they managed to subdue our country, take it by force, destroy it, conquer it, and so on and so on. And I always really wanted to. Do you understand? Therefore, please be more open-minded about these formulations.
С более широким взглядом подходите к этим формулировкам. А что касается
And as for economic disputes, again, we don't have any. If they impose sanctions, it means they are not satisfied with mutually beneficial cooperation, relationships, partnerships. It means they don't need it, although that's exactly what was offered to them. And why? So see point 1. Because they do not consider our territory as a territory that our people should govern. They deny even in their painful consciousness that we have the right to dispose of our own resources. It's also understandable.
Maria Vladimirovna, thank you. One more small question. And based on this, can Britain become a kind of trigger for a war with Russia in Ukraine?
Well, I don't really understand what you mean. We said they are an unfriendly regime. That's actually how they behave so far. Thank you. So, is this a brain post with us? Hello, we have 3 questions today. The first one, is it possible to count on the fact that the unrealized Kyzyl-Kuragino railway project can become part of the Russia-Mongolia-China corridor? How do our Mongolian and Chinese neighbors feel about this potential project? As you know, the issue of the implementation of certain projects that you mentioned, they fall within the competence of the economic bloc of the Russian government. Therefore, you can apply there. As far as I know, this topic is still being studied by interested parties. But, of course, only our financial and economic unit gives a detailed comment on this. Thank you. Next question. The press secretary of the Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry announced the closure of the representative office of the media group of Russia Today, Sputnik of Azerbaijan. Before that, the Russian house was closed in Baku. Could you tell me what's going on? As you know, we are in contact with the Azerbaijani side on this issue, and we have brought our position to the attention of our Azerbaijani colleagues. Therefore, this is a really important issue for us, and I think it is no less important for Baku. We expect constructive reactions. We hope that through joint efforts, we will be able to reach mutually acceptable solutions, and we proceed from the fact that our partners in their further steps will be guided precisely by the allied nature of Russia's relations with Azerbaijan and refrain from damaging bilateral ties, multifaceted ties between our countries and peoples. We perfectly hear and understand the arguments. Yes, indeed, the law is the law. No one disputes. But it is always possible to find mutually acceptable solutions and find an opportunity to resolve the situation. Therefore, I do not see any contradictions here between the observance of legality and normal mutually respectful relations to resolve the situation. Thank you. And the third question. For the first time, the United States refused to be a co-sponsor of the draft anti-Russian resolution of the UN General Assembly on Ukraine. Washington offered its document without accusations against Russia at the beginning of the conflict. As Fred Navens said, this project was perverted. As a result, when voting, the United States abstained from supporting its own project. Help me figure out this kitchen resolution on Ukraine. As you know, we have published several comments and written comments from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and oral explanations have been given. I won't repeat it. It's all available. I can just send you additional information. Well, by the way, we can also publish it additionally today. That would be great. Thank you. Thank you. So the news is with us. The news is not with us yet. With us, yes. Hello. Our question: Slovakia may, following the example of the United States, demand that Ukraine return the funds spent on it. Deputy Speaker of the Slovak Parliament, Andriy Danko, said. According to him, Bratislava has sent €3.5 billion to help Kyiv. What other countries can follow this path? What will the Kyiv authorities be forced to do then? Yes. The Kyiv authorities should not think about how they are, who will make any financial claims to them. Unfortunately, this is a secondary issue, although it is very important, because we are talking about the bondage to which the Ukrainian population, so to speak, was sent. The question is something else. The primary issue, and the problem that has become full-fledged, is how to preserve the Ukrainian population. After all, everything that Zelensky and his predecessors are doing is, as it were, in the name of the Ukrainian people. It was the Ukrainian people who saw Zelensky kneel in front of him, and now it turns out that this Ukrainian people did not remain because of Zelensky's actions, which are now being mobilized by 18-year-olds in Ukraine, and then the wards want to get 2 14-year-olds because of nationalist battalions. That's what's on the agenda. This is the #1 topic. And as for the claims, well, what are you talking about? This is simply the sale of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, into some kind of inhuman slavery. Why do I say inhuman? Because before, when they were sold into slavery, after all, well, first of all, it was later condemned by everyone as something unacceptable, and secondly, but still, it had some kind of local character. Now in Ukraine, slavery is carried by 3D format. They sell the lives of current citizens of Ukraine. They sell the lives of future generations of citizens of Ukraine infected lands. That's the answer to the question of how they dispose of their future generations. They sell the subsoil of Ukraine and explored, and the soils that are being exported now, and those that seem to be there, or maybe there is an understanding that they may be there. Do you understand? That's what it is. This is just such a new slavery, which is now being experimentally worked out in Ukraine, its people by Western so-called curators. Yes, thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Good afternoon. We have one question left. The foreign minister, the Chinese foreign minister, has repeatedly stated that China supports all efforts aimed at achieving peace, including the recent consensus that was reached between the United States and Russia. The PERC also calls on all relevant parties to take part in the peace talks. The question is Russia considering holding peace talks with the participation of representatives of Ukraine in the near future? Well, or in general, at what stage do you think it will be possible? You know, we don't have this stage starting now, or yesterday or tomorrow. We have been talking about negotiations in general, about the fact that this path has always been a priority for us all this time, and we emphasize every time that it was on the part of the Kiev regime, under pressure from Western curators, that the decision was made to ban the negotiation process. If you are talking about contacts, but I have already commented on them, with the Americans, the primary task now is simply to unblock the contacts themselves. And as for globally, I have already given a global answer to this question. Thank you. Thank you. Lee Reuter is with us.
Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Yes, hello.
We have two questions today, and the first one concerns the negotiations taking place in Istanbul between the delegations of Russia and the United States. They often talk about annoying factors that the two countries intend to work on eliminating. In addition to the work of diplomatic missions, what annoying factors exist for Russia? What factors are the United States talking about? And, accordingly, who represents Russia for these negotiations?
You know, I will answer this question in general because they are just sitting and sorting out the details right now. The main annoying factor is that these contacts were completely blocked. You remember, negotiations were not conducted in any way, neither in person, nor by phone, nor at the level of foreign ministers, nor at the level of experts. Our delegations have not met at the venues of international organizations. Well, and with all, so to speak, derivatives. Moreover, you remember, the speech has already reached the point that even residents of the countries from the Obama-Biden opposition of this tandem were denied the implementation of initial requests related simply to life support, paperwork, visas, and so on.
Связанных просто с жизнеобеспечением, оформлением документов, виз и так далее.
And for many, these are vital things, given that, for example, we are talking about mixed families. These were the main stimuli, the inability to simply communicate with each other. Because as soon as there is communication, it's like there is a chance to find mutually acceptable solutions or mutual understanding. That's when everything is blocked. Well, of course, there's already something to talk about.
Would you specify who represents Russia at the negotiations?
I think we'll do it a little later. Representatives of the limit, who are responsible for Russian-American relations. I mean those who are directly involved in Russian-American relations.
Thank you. And the second question concerns relations with Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the other day that Russia is interested in Ukraine eventually turning into a friendly neighboring state. That's why such a transformation could happen in Moscow's opinion, and in particular, if the new president of Ukraine, like Zelensky, is hostile towards Russia.
You know, the most surprising thing is that I heard this question from Reuters. Why? Because, of course, everyone associates Reuters with the history of Britain, the British Empire. Now it is already such a mass media, a holding of such an Anglo-Saxon world. Here you have Canada. Here you have, of course, in general, this North Atlantic, what we call right. Tell me how. Well, you know the history of the country. The media where you work should know perfectly well. Otherwise, I think you wouldn't even have been invited to work. And you know the history of Britain and America. And it began on the one hand as the history of a joint state, which then fought for many years. In other words, and not only that, it was not just a state together, they were brothers, they were the same families, they were the closest relatives, friends, representatives of the same social groups. And what a fierce war it was, and a war that has been going on for more than a couple of years. Sorry, the war, which went on in my opinion for, 13 years? Give or take, yes. And, by the way, this war has happened more than once. At first it was, in my opinion, from 1775 to 1783 year. Then, another such confrontation broke out at the beginning of the 19th century, 1712th year. I'm not going to list it all. You know, by the way, I would even like to read you a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica. The tragedy of the birth of the United States, it says there, was for both England and the United States that heavy, gloomy memories remained, not only about the Anglo-American War, but also about its consequences. These memories then poisoned the relationship between the two branches of the Anglo-American race for a century and a half. What are we seeing now? We are now seeing the closest alliance in the form of some kind of direct, I do not know, everything, and strategic partnership, and some kind of family relations, and a single bundle, a tandem, you know as you like, between London and Washington, well, adjusted for the wind, of course. England and the States are the closest allies. Therefore, it is not the first time that the international community, the world countries, neighbors or United States, like some states, have become part of such tragic conflict stories and then come out of it. So I will not repeat the history of Russia, and I will not speak in detail. I think you have heard it many times, including in the retelling of the President of the Russian Federation. You know all this very well, but I want to say once again that the world community has experienced not only in modern times, but also in historical retrospect. There is overcoming various crisis phenomena, even the most severe ones. Here I am to you simply not because this is the example I wanted to give, but because you represent the mass media, the country of origin of which passed a similar test.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is the news front with us? Yes, hello. International News Agency News Front, Bulgarian edition. If I may, two questions. The first question. French President Macron said that many countries in the European Union and outside the European Union are ready to send troops to Ukraine as a guarantee of signing a peace agreement. Also, in most European countries, the people are categorically against sending any troops to Ukraine. What is Russia's position on Macron's statement? Everyone is already talking about Macron's statement. I have the impression that this is also some kind of meme. When they say Macron's statement, everyone starts smiling. And there is a reason for this, because they are contradictory in nature, because he contradicts himself, because sometimes wishful thinking is given out. Now the second point. I have just said, answering in my opinion another question, that, unfortunately, Western Europe, the European Union has failed its capabilities as a guarantor of anything on the European continent over the past 10 years, and gave concrete examples confirming it. Perhaps, in order to speculate again on the topic, they should first give some example of their successful guaranteeing someone something. And then we will understand what they are basically talking about. And the last moment, let's still advise them not to reason hypothetically, but to reason in the realities of today, in the realities that unfold on Earth, based on your previous experience, and with the fact that you need to be responsible for your words. So let's wish them all this. Thank you. And the second question, if I may, is related to the 147 years of the liberation of Bulgaria in the Russian-Turkish Liberation War. As you know, the 3rd of March is the national holiday of Bulgaria, and the Russian-Turkish Liberation War occupies such a sacred place in the history of our countries. And because thanks to the fraternal victory that brought us independence, the statehood of Bulgaria, we continue to keep gratitude and appreciation for the soldier liberator. We cherish historical memory. We are preparing for the celebration of the 3rd of March. In this regard, I can't help but ask, on such a historically significant date, if there are any official congratulations between Bulgaria and Russia under a diplomatic or other established channel, and what is necessary, in your opinion, for the resumption of a healthy Bulgarian dialogue at the official level, the positive development of bilateral relations, and what would you wish the Bulgarian people in connection with such a holiday? Yes, You know I am. You are absolutely right. The national holiday of the Republic of Bulgaria, the day of the liberation of the country from Moscow's yoke, is inextricably linked with Russia. It is celebrated on the 3rd of March. This is the day of signing of the San Stefano Peace Treaty, following the results of the Russian-Turkish War of 1877-1878 years, and the victory of our ancestors, brought the Bulgarians long-awaited freedom from the 5th-century Turkish yoke, made it possible to restore the Bulgarian state on the world map with the active, disinterested assistance of the Russian Empire. It seems to me that those who want to understand the true spirit of this Russian-Bulgarian brotherhood, relations, mutual understanding, it is enough to visit the top of Shibko once on the 3rd of March to see how massive and nationwide this holiday is. And that is why we are sincerely grateful to the huge number of Bulgarian citizens who honor the memory of Russian soldiers who fell for the freedom of this country. Yes, at the same time, we have seen everything in recent years, and the desire from the outside to interfere with Russian-Bulgarian relations, contacts, relations, Russian-Bulgarian relations. And inside Bulgaria, unfortunately, such an anti-Russian, Russophobic minority is being formed. And vandalism against our joint monuments, by the way, monuments. What just wasn't there? Attempts have been made to restrict or even ban annual celebrations on mistakes, reschedule the national holiday. We even heard a proposal in Bulgaria for another date. But I hope that this will not happen, because, well, you can't rewrite history. In recent years, Russian diplomats in Bulgaria have not received invitations to official ceremonies on the occasion of the 3rd of March. In the speeches of the authorities on the restoration of Bulgarian statehood, Russia is not mentioned at all. There is no rewritten history. It doesn't happen. A story can only be true. Otherwise, it's a lie to ourselves. The practice of mutual sending congratulations on the occasion of national holidays has been discontinued by the Bulgarian side. I don't want to list all these Russophobic attacks that we have been seeing lately. But taking this opportunity, I want to congratulate our numerous Bulgarian friends, brothers, on the upcoming anniversary. We sincerely wish them well and prosperity. We are bound by common traditional values, a rich cultural and spiritual heritage, which should be returned to the role of a key factor, determining the nature and tone of Russian-Bulgarian relations. I know that it will be so. Thank you. So, is Dala with us?
Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Hello.
We have questions about the Middle East. The first question. The Israeli Prime Minister recently announced that the Israeli army will maintain its presence on the Dutch Heights indefinitely, thereby confirming that Israel's occupation of southern Syria will be permanent. Meanwhile, Israeli attacks on targets in Syria continue. How does Moscow assess Israel's actions during the period of political changes in Syria?
As we have repeatedly said, applied to the situation in Syria, we proceed from the need for strict respect for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of this country, and are firmly convinced that in the current difficult conditions, all members of the world community should show responsibility, strictly observe the norms of international law, and avoid steps that could provoke a further escalation of tension in Syria. This also applies to Israel, whose actions in the Dutch Heights area violate the terms of the Syrian-Israeli Agreement on the Separation of Forces from 1974, and of course, the strikes of the Israeli armed forces on military civilian targets in Syria are of serious concern, and such forceful actions obviously do not serve the tasks of stabilizing the situation and further aggravate the already extremely difficult situation in this country.
The second question also concerns Israel's actions. Israel continues to block the boss of humanitarian aid to residents of the Gaza Strip. As a result, 6 babies died. This was reported by Hamas. How does Moscow assess Israel's actions, which run counter to the ceasefire agreement reached with Hamas?
You know, as I understand it, the delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip is very difficult, but it continues. We have already talked about this, answered the question of your publication. We have talked in detail about the assistance that our country provides to the Palestinian people. We called on all parties, and continue to do so, to observe the agreements signed between Israel and Hamas on January 15th of this year. Well, at this moment I have such information.
And one last question, if I may. This question also concerns Gaza. US President Donald Trump has published a video gas generated by artificial intelligence, where he and no, it is not resting in Gaza. In your opinion, won't this situation worsen in Gaza, which is in such a deplorable state today?
Well, you know, I think that it was in the first question that I, as it were, even in the context of the other side, said the key phrase, it is necessary to take all actions that do not aggravate the situation, but are aimed at improving it. This is the tactic the White House has now. Such expression and outrageousness somewhere, such a challenge. Let's see what this will lead to and how it will contribute, hopefully, to improving the situation. So far, in my opinion, it's too early to judge and too early to draw any conclusions. Let's give some time to really comment with the facts in hand. Well, while the administration has been in the White House for only 2 months, so let's wait a little longer, and then we can comment specifically. And first of all, of course, the Palestinians themselves should have their say regarding such actions. So, colleagues, I literally have the opportunity to answer one more question. I know there are a lot of questions. We will definitely respond then individually. Please let's give the floor to the tape. Ru.
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
A couple of questions. The first leader who won the elections in Germany of the CDU-CSU bloc, Friedrich Merz, who previously spoke about supporting Ukraine, at the same time recently spoke about the possibility of restoring relations with Russia, spoke about it as a historically culturally European country. In your opinion, how seriously should such statements be considered, and what does Russia expect from the future leadership in general?
Well, first of all, I draw your attention to the fact that literally the same topic was commented on yesterday by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. This is one time. Secondly, you know, we determine our place in history and in the modern world ourselves, and this place is fixed in our constitution. Therefore, well, in general, if these assessments are made, then, probably, they should be commented on not so much by us, as by the population that voted for the Merz. Perhaps he decided to expand the horizons of their knowledge in some way. I don't know. These are questions for them, not for us. We identified ourselves, fixed everything in the main law of the country. Therefore, I don't see any point in making additional comments here. You see, in order to self-determine, we do not need to look at ourselves through other people's eyes. This, by the way, is a very important formative element of self-identification. We know our history, that's why we treat it so carefully, and that's why we are ready to defend it. We know how we want to see the future generation, our country in the future. We can say that we agree with some assessments, disagree with some, but we don't need to hear from others who we are. We have formulated this perfectly ourselves, and now I want to emphasize it once again. I always say this, but I would like to emphasize once again that, among other things, we have also fixed this in our own constitution. We are a country civilization. As for the results of the selection, I want to say again that the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, commented on this just yesterday. The results, it seems to me, indicate that what Germany professed under the previous rulers did not justify itself. Request for another. I'm not going to delve into the statistical estimates of this vote right now. Our embassy in Berlin commented on them. As for the statements made by the candidates, They were political statements. Now these are statements that will be made by statesmen. We will proceed from their statements and, most importantly, the concrete steps they will take, in particular with regard to our country. We have never sought conflict with anyone. The collapse of relations with Germany was not our fault. If there is another philosophy to confess, we will be ready to consider the relevant concrete proposals of Berlin if they appear. To date, we have not received any signals from the German side about its interest in restoring normal interstate dialogue, which is also what I can tell you. Colleagues, I will allow you to conclude the briefing today. Everyone who sent us questions earlier, we will definitely give answers. Thank you. Until next time. Thank you for your attention.